Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Andre Fernandez, co-founder and CEO of Invert, a carbon reduction and removal company that's raised $26 million in funding. Andre, what's going on?
Good, man. Thanks, Brett, for having me. Thanks for inviting me to your show. Glad to be here.
No problem. Super excited. And I want to start with a little bit about your background. So as we were just talking pre-interview, you're calling from Canada, but you grew up somewhere far, far south of Canada, and it's not the US. Tell us about where you grew up and how you ended up in Canada.
So I at times tell my friends that I made one bad decision in my life. And that decision was deciding to leave the Caribbean and live in Canada. But obviously I'm joking. I love Ottawa. I'm based in Ottawa today. A lot colder than it is in the Caribbean. But long story short, I was born in Dominica, raised in Antigua. So beautiful weather, great culture, lots of good food. The beaches are fantastic. But of course, being a small island state, extremely exposed to climate change. And so I've lost my home many times to hurricanes, and that's the passion or the driving force behind what we do at Invert. So again, really wanted to spend some time helping to address climate change, and my background in the Caribbean sort of led me here. And being in Canada obviously facilitates the ability to do what we do more than it would be in the Caribbean. So that's why it's a beneficial thing to live in Canada.
Do you recall moment in your life where you said enough's enough? Was it after sounds like multiple houses, after the third house where you're all right, enough's enough. I'm going to go try to tackle climate change. What was that trigger for you? Can you trace it back to one specific time or moment?
Yeah, well, funny enough, it was when I was 4 years old. So at 4 years old, I remember coming home, and it was the first time that I figured out what a tadpole was or is. And so we got home and we lost our roof and all that sort of stuff. And we had about 2 inches of water in our home and everything was destroyed. And I remember looking at these things swimming around our house, and I was thinking to myself, what are these fish-like objects? And so anyways, I figured out what it was the next time I lost my home. And so I was 9 years old. I realized what a tadpole is. And at that point in time, I remember thinking to myself, what did I do to deserve this? Right? I was a child. I just lost my home. What did Andre do? What did I do wrong to be sort of feeling this trauma and all these traumatic events? And so anyways, that has been deeply rooted in me. And so, yeah, it's something that I've felt since I was 4 and then sort of amplified when I was 9. And obviously, as I lost or had more trauma, it sort of accelerated from there.
Crazy. I always admire people who can turn these pain points, these horrible things in life into action. And sounds like you've done that very much here. Talk to us about the founding of the company and the early days of the company.
Yeah. So my previous gig was at Canopy Growth. And we grew it from a startup to the largest cannabis company in the world at one point. And so that was an extremely exciting time, but also lots of ups and downs. And anyways, I was burning the candle or whatever we want to call it at both ends. And I promised myself when I left that I would take a few years off. I would go travel the world and sort of relax and unwind from that. And so anyways, that did not happen because as I left, it was COVID. And so the only thing I could really do was stay at home. And of course, your brain naturally starts churning. And so we decided, 2 of my friends, 2 of my best friends, myself and my partner, Aislinn, we went to Antigua. So obviously I'm from Antigua. My mom was there. And we rented a sort of villa in Antigua. So beautiful weather. We could go to the beach. We're still isolated, but at least we could hang out with each other and be in our own bubble, whatever it is. And so through that conversation, the daily conversation between the friends, we realized that there was something there between the 3 of us because I just left my gig and I was brainstorming about what's next. And I knew it was about climate change. And I was really focused on nature. And my best buddy, Oliver, he was at a mining company. And so he was corporate development for Karora Resources. And my other best buddy, Reed, was at Marsh, so world's largest insurance broker. And so we basically figured, look, we're going to need mining, we're going to need rare earth minerals, all these types of things for the green transition. So how can we help mining companies essentially decarbonize, right? And how can we combine risk management solutions in the form of insurance to help accelerate that decarbonization? And so it's sort of spiraled. And it started in a cottage in Antigua, and very quickly we pitched it to one of our first investors. And through this conversation, we got our first customer. And so right around inception, we basically had customer number one, who would be a large foundational customer. And it obviously wouldn't guarantee success, but it was something that we knew we had something to start off, like a good foundation, a good base. We would generate cash. We could essentially have a pilot, right? Something to show other companies. And so that was really the foundation of how Invert was started. And then obviously we went from there, and we thought it would be just a nice, fun business, sort of like between friends and whatever. And anyways, it accelerated and things got even more exciting. And yeah, my life is extremely enjoyable and also extremely stressful at times because of how much we're up to and just the ambition and everything we want to accomplish.
Now, that first paying customer, like, how'd you convince them to give you money? I guess is the question there. It's always hard to get your first customer. Sounds like you managed to get that very early on. How'd you manage to pull that off?
Yeah, I mean, it was really showing that there was something valuable that we can deliver. And so it really started with a series of questions, right? And through getting that feedback, which they were willing to give, we could tailor a solution to them over time. And even though they were giving us answers, we still had to pitch it to them in a way that made sense where they would pay for it. So the great part of it is we were able to have access to employees within that business because of our network. And through that access, we were able to get feedback on what they really needed to find value in decarbonization. And so they were giving us the answers, right? And they were telling us what they really needed. All we had to do is package it up in such a way that they knew that they could trust us to deliver. And so once we were able to show that or to showcase it in a bit of a pilot, they were willing to pay. And so we sort of lined that up from the beginning. And because we did that upfront work, discovery, and just really trying to understand how we can create value for them, it landed extremely well. And they were really successful, and they could show it through the investment that they were able to achieve by doing this decarbonization work, by being very public with it. So they were the first junior gold mining company to go carbon neutral, announce decarbonization plans, all these things. And they were able to attract incremental investment because of this sort of public announcement around being more green than other companies. And so that also helped us validate what we were able to deliver. And that led to customer number 2 and 3 and so on and so forth. And then beyond market. So we obviously started with mining as a focus, and then parallel industries and so on and so forth. So yeah, it was maybe a bit of right place, right time, having the right connections and, having access to specific people. But then beyond that, it was making sure that we could build a team that could execute and actually deliver on what we said we would do.
How much of a scramble was it to deliver for that first project? I know I've been in that position many times where you sold like customer one, and behind the scenes, it's a hustle to make it happen. On a scale of like 1 to 10, how intense was that trying to figure it out, how to deliver?
Yeah, I mean, it was honestly, I would say it was a 9, right? It wasn't a 10 because we had done a lot of the work. We made sure that we had the connections. We talked to everybody that we were planning to work with, and we really did plan it out. But then, of course, when you go to do it for the first time, you're going through the systems, right, that you've never really used, and you're counting on people that you haven't actually counted on before. There's all these things that become stressful, and even the ways of working, right? You've never worked with these people previously. Mm-hmm. And so you're figuring out, okay, I would normally do something this way, and this person is doing it this way. Is it okay? Are they going to accept it that way? And having trust in these people, obviously at the initial stages, right? As a founder and CEO, you have to trust the team, but you've never necessarily worked with some of these people. And so that was the stressful part. And then working with partners in the industry that we've never worked with. So people who were outside of Invert, not clients, but suppliers to Invert at the time. We were building relationships with them, and there were certain things that they said that they weren't able to deliver, or they weren't able to deliver on time. And so behind the scenes, there was a scramble for certain things. And it was like, hey, well, you said you were going to get this at this price. And there was a whole, roundabout trying to get all this stuff that we promised. And anyways, the long and short of it is we were able to do it on time, under budget, all that sort of stuff, which was the intention. And so they were public about the fact that not only met what they needed, but sort of like exceeded their expectations, which was obviously valuable to us. So crazy scramble, but the team and trusting the team paid off. And yeah, at the end of the day, we're still here today. So, something sort of worked. So yeah.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode.
How did you think about moving into those other industries? So you mentioned going from mining into other verticals. Like, how did you evaluate which verticals to move into?
Yeah, so the reason why we started with mining is really because we had a strong mining engineering network. And so I went to Queen's University in Canada for my undergrad. And it's one of, I believe, 2 universities in Canada that have a mining engineering program. And so just by nature, we had a lot of friends or network of mining engineers. And so when we were starting Invert, we said, okay, look, like we have this really strong network of people in mining. So let's start there. And through that process, what we realized is even though mining needs to decarbonize and all this sort of stuff, they were 2 to 4 years behind other industries. And so that learning led us to look and say, okay, who is actually leading or really looking for what we're doing today, right? Like we don't have to convince this industry that they need to do this thing or that they will need to do this thing in 2 years or 4 years or whatever it is. Who needs this today? And so through that process, it became very apparent who those companies are and sort of were, and continue to test, right? So continue to have conversations. And you probably hear this a lot, right? It's using your network, connecting with people at various companies, seeing if there's value, getting a lot of no's to begin with, right? The no's are almost, it's one of those things where when you've left, let's say a relatively successful company or career, and you start something new, and this was the first time that I founded something literally from scratch. It was the first time that I was getting told no so much. And it was like, oh my God, I've never been told no this much. I mean, of course, you get told no and you fail and all this sort of stuff, but 99% of the time you're getting told no. And so that was the process of finding new verticals, right? Who is the next yes outside of the mining space? Because we have a pilot that we can show that we can deliver value within mining, but who's going to be the next customer in another vertical that says yes, so that we can continue to prove that value in another vertical? And so anyways, the yeses or the nos became less frequent and the yeses started to pick up. And that's how we could narrow in on what was going to be the vertical that we could focus on most and sort of not be as scattered as we was to begin with, right? There was a bit less discovery, more focus. And through time, through testing, we were able to see, okay, there's 2 or 3 verticals that we could really focus on. And now we're a lot deeper in those verticals or markets because it's really both in what we do. You have verticals, but then you also have markets that you can focus on.
Now, let's talk about the product side. Are there multiple products or is there just one main product?
Yeah, so the tricky part about carbon credits or nature-based investing is that it can be a complicated subject, but ultimately the unit or the monetization model is a carbon credit. And so you might think, okay, well, that's one product and that's it, right? We just have one product and that's all customers care about. However, in reality, customers really care about the attributes of each carbon credit or each carbon credit project. And so they care about the jurisdiction, they care about the social development that that project actually helps achieve for the community. They care about the biodiversity that it protects. They care about a lot of these things that are unique to each project. And so what we find is companies who operate within a specific jurisdiction want projects within that jurisdiction, right? It makes sense. They want to give back to sort of their local community and so on. And so by nature of the way that they view the product itself, now you sort of have multiple sub-products or products that vary by jurisdiction or by their attributes. And so we have projects in Brazil, we have projects in Mexico, we have projects in the US and in Canada, and we're working on expanding from there. But what we're finding is customers typically say, hey, we're looking for a product or a carbon credit or a nature-based project that does X or is in this jurisdiction. And so it limits the buyers or certain buyers who want to buy specific carbon credits, if that makes sense.
Some dumb questions for you, or just probably one dumb question. What's the alternative to a nature-based project?
Yeah, well, you can have technology-based carbon credits or sequestration. So if you think about something like direct air capture, so technology that basically sucks CO2 out of the atmosphere and stores it under the ground geologically or mineralizes it into concrete or something like that. And so that's the opposite end of the spectrum where it's technology based. And other than that, typically you'll have nature. So think of it as really a bifurcated market between nature and technology.
In terms of marketing, how important is education for you? It sounds like there's probably a lot of different stakeholders that require education. How do you think about just market education?
Education is extremely critical. Again, as I was saying, it's sort of a complicated subject because it isn't like a fungible unit, right? A carbon credit in the eyes of the buyer isn't fungible across all carbon credits. And so from that perspective, the need for education is extremely high. And it's about 75% of companies don't have a dedicated person or team to do diligence on the product that they're buying. So you have this fairly complex and detailed product that they want to buy, but they don't necessarily have the team to do the due diligence on that product itself. And so the marketing function really needs to serve as an educational tool, but also a tool for simplification so that buyers can look at it and say, hey, look, like I don't have a team that can do all this due diligence, but me, the buyer myself, I could look at this and say, oh, okay, great. This is a good project. I like this. I want to buy it. And so it's really about education and simplifying the buying process for the end buyer.
And that end buyer, what's the ICP? Is it like chief sustainability officer or like who's the market that you're after or the buyer that you're after?
Yeah, this is also the opportunity, right? Sometimes it's a CSO, sometimes it's the chief legal. You have various groups in the company that are responsible for different things. And sometimes you might have the CSO reporting to the CFO or, whatever, varying org structures. But typically you're looking for somebody in the sustainability function that is usually the buyer. Sometimes it might be in procurement, but 9 out of 10 times we're looking to have conversations with chief sustainability officers, head of sustainability, something around the environment or climate change. Those are the people that we love having conversations with.
When we look at the competitive landscape, there's a lot of companies that are in this space, I would imagine. Is your positioning that it's nature-based? Like, is that why people would choose you? Or what's the big thing that makes you different from the others in the market?
Yeah, good question. And I would say there's a few reasons, right? And when we started Invert, there were a lot of, let's say, negative headlines around carbon credits. And so that was the reason or the founding reason for Invert. And so we wanted to squarely focus on quality and deliver quality. And so what you'll hear is sort of carbon markets 2.0. And so the low quality, low price carbon market is going away and it's transitioning to a higher price premium carbon market. And so differentiation today started with quality. But now everybody's talking about quality or high integrity. Everybody's saying that they're doing that, right? And so no longer is high integrity or quality just the differentiator. And so the difference between us and, maybe some others in the market is that we're actually executing. We're actually doing the things that we said we would. And so we're developing these projects. We're investing capital from our balance sheet and from our investors. And we're actually seeing great return. We're cash flow positive, all of these really good things. And so we have some of the largest buyers in the space who buy our product and validate what we're doing. We build them into our business. And so our ability to execute is one of the things that differentiates us. And then that aside, it's like once you have commoditization of quality, then it's going to be who wins distribution, right? So obviously we're focused on distribution and making sure that we own those channels. And then it comes down to customer service. So as everybody focuses on distribution, then you're going to have the customer service game. And so we're focused on that today. And so our goal or the way that we differentiate ourselves is not just integrity or quality. It's really focusing on execution, distribution, and the customer service piece. We really want our customers to be happy.
On the distribution side, what have you tried that hasn't worked?
Well, we could probably spend hours on this one, but I would say originally we thought we wanted to only be a B2B business or a B2B sales for carbon credit business. And we thought that by owning those relationships, we would, strategically win or whatever it is. And so we still want to have really close relationships with our best customers and all that sort of stuff. But what we learned is in this market specifically, where liquidity isn't as high as other markets, it's good to have other partners selling for you and with you. And so we're really close to a lot of brokers and traders in the space. And so the strategy sort of pivoted from, hey, let's put all of our energy into building one-to-one relationships with various clients and customers, because those take years to build, right? It's like carbon credits is a 12-month at least buying cycle because it's annual. And so that it takes a lot of time. You got to build relationships and then you buy. And so it's really long sales cycles. Whereas if you have a network of people who already have those relationships in place and they have buyers who are ready to buy, they can introduce you as a credible counterparty who has really good projects, all this sort of stuff. Then you can just accelerate that commercialization. And so that was a pivotal point for us where we learned, hey, look, like we still want to invest in a direct B2B sales channel, but our dollars can go a lot further if we sort of do both, right? And so that's how we really focus on distribution. And it's much more than just a direct B2B sales channel.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their US and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
I always ask guests about their most important go-to-market decision. Is that the most important go-to-market decision for you?
No, I don't think so. I think our most important go-to-market decision, and this is still true today, is starting, and maybe this is cliche, I don't know, but is really starting with the customer. And so we don't build things that we want, right? And there's a lot of things that we want to build and, there's all this stuff, but genuinely we build our customers into our business. And so whenever we're developing something new, we ask them, right? Like for feedback, is this something that you want? Is this something that you will pay for? Will you buy it today? And sometimes I do. And sometimes we lock up the contract before we've actually developed the project or the product. And so the best thing that we've ever done is starting with the customer and then working backwards, which is scary at times because sometimes you feel like you need to have a thing before you can sell a thing.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, it feels very much like the opposite, right? Like, what does everybody want? It is a bit of a bespoke market at this point, which I believe will change very quickly. But building customers into our business, meeting once every month, every 2 weeks, whatever it is, and just building that relationship over time has been the best thing that we've ever done.
What about on the fundraising side? So this may be outdated information, but I'll share what I know about the Canadian venture market. In 2018, I was working with some guys in Vancouver who take companies public there. And they were going on the TSXV and they just kind of educated me on how things work there. And they said there's very limited venture capital in Canada. So everyone goes public on the TSXV. That was meant for junior mining companies, but then kind of opened up to all of these like tech startups for like going public. And that became like the channel. That was years ago. So I don't know if that's still the case. What is the venture market like now in Canada? Has it matured a lot from that? Is that accurate, what I just described? I guess I should start with. Feel free to fact check me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, I think it was at least accurate at some point in time, right? And Toronto is still one of the major mining markets, right? Capital markets. And so resource investors do focus on TSX and the TSXV.
Mm-hmm.
The recent challenges have been micro caps haven't been getting the sort of attention, right? And so large capital is flowing to macro or just the big guys, plus 500 million market cap sort of thing. And so the TSXV has maybe struggled a little bit because of that.
Mm-hmm.
But all that said, it is a path to capital markets.
Mm-hmm.
And because of those exchanges, the access to capital is higher in Toronto and specifically from resource investors. And so that actually goes quite well with our business. Resource investors get what we do. We are very similar to metals and mining investments where you can invest dollars today and then you get long recurring streams of revenue, 30 years, 50 years, that sort of thing. And so the ability to generate an annuity type recurring revenue structure resonates with that type of investor. And so it has worked relatively well for us, I would say. And the flip side of that is capital markets in Canada are not where it is in the US. And so you'll usually find Canadian companies after a certain point saying, hey, let's go south. Let's find bigger pools of capital. And maybe that isn't as easy as it was to do back then today. So, that presents a bit of a challenge. But anyways, all that said, we have fantastic investors, really have been behind us. They see the long-term vision and have really stuck around and sort of got behind us. And so that has been really beneficial for us building the company, building for the long term, not making short-term sort of irrational decisions.
Mhm.
And so anyways, they understand the business and it's been fantastic working with them.
Final question. I'm seeing we're now over on time. So let's zoom out 3 to 5 years into the future. What's the big picture vision going to look like here?
Yeah, well, I mean, first and foremost, hopefully 3 to 5 years, we can say we've solved climate change and, everybody's safe and we have a future and everybody's happy with that future. That's sort of like the highest level 3 to 5 year vision. And I genuinely don't think we'll get there in 3 to 5 years, but that would be fantastic, right? That's what we're aiming for. And then drilling down from that with Invert, we want to be able to say that we helped assign a value to nature and built nature as an asset class, right? So can companies actually put nature on their balance sheet? And can it be an accretive investment? Or is their balance sheet going to grow because they're investing in nature? So can they value nature? Can they value the biodiversity? Can they value the increasing streams of revenue that nature is generating for them as a business? And can that help the value of their own business grow? And so that's one of the highest level things that we want to accomplish. And then, of course, we want to also accomplish gigaton scale. So we want to have a meaningful impact on climate change as Invert, right, as a subcomponent of solving climate change. And so to do that, we need to have large scale ability to either sequester CO2 or avoid more CO2 going into the atmosphere. So really, it's can we get to scale? Can we help people value nature? And can we help solve climate change? And hopefully we can do that in 2 to 5 years.
I love it. Gives me hope. I feel like that's a nice timeline for these to get solved.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's it, right? We have to have hope. If we don't have hope, then we're not going to do it. So hopefully this helps.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you ever have days where like, oh, like maybe we can't solve this problem? Not you specifically, but like as society as a whole. Like I read some of those articles about, like in North America, like we're doing certain things, and they'll say like in, China or India, like they're just trying to survive. They don't have the luxury of caring in the way that we care. And like when I see that, I think, oh, like they're right. Like if you're struggling to survive, then it's kind of a luxury to think about climate change. Like, do you ever have days where you're like lose hope to some extent?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. A lot of societies thinking about basic needs and where do they get their food from, right? How do they survive? And so it is really hard to think about 3 to 5 years from now when they're thinking about their food today, sort of thing.
Mhm.
And so I think that's why the developed world needs to take responsibility for a lot of these things, right? So those who can't afford to think about climate change, we need to be the ones that are facilitating that process, investing in solving these problems. And so that needs to be true, but also for sure, there are days where I think I can't make a difference, right? Like I'm doing my recycling and, I'm doing my part to try to minimize my consumption and all this stuff. But when I look at the macro scale happenings, I sort of say, okay, well, Andre doesn't matter, right? And there are days where I feel like that.
Mhm.
But then obviously you realize, hey, look, like I'll do everything I can. And if everybody had that attitude, then we would be able to solve it.
Mhm.
And so there are obviously days where it feels discouraging, right? And maybe those days are more frequent than I would hope for. But at the end of the day, the days where I feel more positive or hopeful are far greater than those days where I feel discouraged. So I think it's natural for people to feel, look around and say, hey, like this doesn't feel good. Right. We've had wildfires here where we couldn't go outside, and that's not a normal thing for us.
Mhm.
And so those days are hard. But yeah, I think when you look at the science, when you look at the market, how it's evolving and sort of what people are doing out there today, it's
Mhm.
definitely possible. If everybody tries their best, we can get there. And we need to help those who need the help, right? That's extremely important. So yeah, hard, but definitely possible.
And is the general thinking in the industry there, kind of similar to like the Tesla go-to-market model where it's, start off high and then kind of work your way down and get the technology cheaper and cheaper? I know there's a lot of other companies that have done that. Is that the general thinking there of, prove it, build the technology for the, developed world and then kind of expand into these emerging markets as the technology gets cheaper? Is that the thinking?
Yeah, so it is like that to some extent. So it's typically like that with just the technology side of the market.
Mhm.
But the way to think about global decarbonization is it all follows a cost abatement curve. So you basically do the cheapest decarbonization today, and that might be in India, right? Like just making it up. If we took our dollars and we followed that cost abatement curve, we would decarbonize the cheapest or the most efficient way possible. So it's not by any one technology, it's by saying, hey, maybe the cheapest thing is by avoiding cutting down rainforests, right? And we should do that first. And then once we do that, then we should always have renewable power, right? And then once we do that, then we should have direct air capture and so on and so forth. And so it's really looking at the global option set of what's possible for decarbonization following that cost abatement curve, investing in the things that are globally most cost effective today, while scaling technology to reduce their costs over time. So it's not an or, it's an and all, right? We need to do all of these things all at once in order to get there. And it's finding those global solutions today that we can invest in today that are profitable for investors.
Makes sense. I love it. All right, man, this has been a blast. Before we wrap, if there's anyone listening in that just wants to follow along with you, where should we send them? Where should they go?
Yeah, so our website is invert.world. That's the best place to contact us. We're obviously on LinkedIn. We're not on any other social. So if you want to reach out, either invert.world or find us on LinkedIn. And yeah, thanks for having me, Brett. Really appreciate it. Great chatting with you. Hope to talk again soon.
Cheers, man. Keep in touch.
Cheers.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.